All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our BCBA Practice Exam series with exam number 7. Today we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please subscribe for all of our updates. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shutout. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. Nathaniel does not like to participate in the social group that takes place after school. His teacher tells Nathaniel that if he participates in the group for just 5 minutes, then the teacher will give him an ice cream cone, Nathaniel's favorite. Nathaniel agrees and, once in the group, starts to enjoy himself and stays there for the rest of the day and then even joins the next day. What did the teacher utilize? Now, what the teacher used here is kind of an underused and underdiscussed idea in behavior analysis, but it can be very powerful. And so, what has the teacher done? Well, first, what is she trying to accomplish? Well, she wants Nathaniel to participate in the social group, and Nathaniel doesn't want to participate. So the teacher says, well, just 5 minutes will get you an ice cream cone, which is Nathaniel's favorite. So the teacher has established this very powerful, almost irresistible reinforcement for Nathaniel for simply engaging in the group for 5 minutes, something that Nathaniel is capable of. So those are two key ideas. One, the reinforcement is almost irresistible. It's Nathaniel's favorite. And two, the skill Nathaniel already possesses. He can participate in the group, he just doesn't. And so once Nathaniel agrees, he enjoys himself and he stays there the rest of the day, and then he even joins the next day. So not only is the behavior change for the day, but it persists. So what has the teacher utilized? A behavior trap. Yes, with the behavior trap, we are luring in the learner to a situation using hard to resist reinforcers, or contingencies like ice cream, and having them engage in a skill they already know how to do, which is in Nathaniel's case participating. And then once they're in the situation, they contact the referred reinforcement, and then the situation itself starts presenting more reinforcing contingencies, which maintains and continues the behavior. That's what's happened here. The teacher set this behavior trap, knowing once Nathaniel got into the group, he would continue to participate in that group. It isn't bootleg reinforcement, because bootleg reinforcement means you've gained reinforcement without actually engaging in the response. And it's not non-contingent reinforcement. Non-contingent reinforcement is an antecedent strategy where reinforcement is given on a schedule. And of course, that's not what occurred here. So what happened here was the teacher set a behavior trap using highly irresistible reinforcement and having Nathaniel participate in this group, something he already knew how to do. A behavior technician is asked by her supervisor to design a measurement system to measure how often Tom bites his fingernails. The supervisor is doing this as part of the behavior technician's supervision hours, so the supervisor expects the measurement system to be usable in the real treatment procedure. If you're advising the behavior technician on what measurement system to use, which of the following measurements would you tell them not to use? All right, this is a long question, but it's actually not a difficult question. And so it's so important to understand what the question is asking so you don't get bogged down by details that don't really matter, right? So what is the question asking about? The question is asking about the measurement you would tell the technician not to use, meaning 3 of these would be okay. 1 is not okay. The behavior technician is measuring how often Tom bites his fingernails. So she could count how often he does. She could use something like rate. She could use interval recording. All these are potential options. All these other ideas about it being part of the hours and usable, it's not really relevant, because you just need to answer the question at hand, which is, which measurement would you tell them not to use for this behavior? What about A, whole interval time sampling? Could she use whole interval time sampling? Well, sure. She could set, or he could set 10-second intervals, and then if Tom bites his fingernails the whole time, she could measure a response. Very feasible. What about rate? Well, she could, or he could, count how often Tom bites his nails and then add a time component and calculate rate. So the technician could possibly use rate. What about play check, or the planned activity check? What's the main idea behind the planned activity check? The planned activity check or play check is simply momentary time sampling in a group. We don't have a group. We just have Tom. So since we don't have a group, they should not be using play check, which immediately says D is going to be okay. So once again, this is not a very difficult question, right? Once we get to play check, we say, well, it's only Tom. There's no group. They can't use play check. The hard part about this question is one, is identifying this word of not, and then two, making sure you're focusing on what the question is asking and not all the irrelevant details. And so if you were advising the technician, you would tell them don't use play check because we're not in a group setting. We have one learner who is Tom. A behavior analyst contracted through a school observed a teacher that they collaborate with using a punishment procedure that, while not harming the child, is not consistent with the BACB ethical guidelines. The analyst has expressed their concern with this teacher before and to the principal, but the teacher persists with the intervention. What answer choice describes the analyst's best option moving forward? Question is asking about what? It's asking about the analyst's best option moving forward. So, what has the analyst done so far? Because we are looking for their next best step. So, we know the analyst is contracted through the school. And remember, even if you're contracted through a third party, your number one priority is to your client, no matter what. And even if you're contracted through a school or a separate entity that doesn't necessarily follow our guidelines or ethical guidelines, you are still bound by those ethical guidelines no matter what. So you're contracted through a school and you see, or the behavior analyst sees, the teacher using a punishment procedure, not harming the child, but is not consistent with our ethical guidelines. So that's an issue, right? Because punishment already has an ethical component to it. If we know for a fact this punishment procedure isn't ethical, that's an issue. So the first thing they should do, right, in any ethical situation is try to resolve it with the person. Well, the analyst has already done that, right? They've talked to the teacher and to the principal. Nothing's changed. So our next step here is what? What can the analyst now do? A, report the teacher to the BACB since they've already attempted to work it out with the teacher. The only way that would make sense is if the teacher was a BCBA. And then nowhere in this question does it make it clear that the teacher is a BCBA. And why is that the case? Well, because our ethical guidelines are for individuals certified through the board. Teachers, they don't have to follow our guidelines. Speech therapists, parents, all these stakeholders are not bound by our ethical code unless they're certified through the board. So A isn't going to do you any good. The BACB has no control over the teacher. B, move on from the issue since the teacher is not bound by the same ethical code. While that's true, for the reasons we just discussed, you still are, or the behavior analyst still is. And so if they are knowingly collaborating with someone using this punishment procedure, they can't be around that any longer because they're actively engaged in a team using a punishment procedure that's unethical. Now, you might say, well, we have to collaborate. And if we were to say collaborate with a speech therapist who was using techniques that weren't necessarily behavior analytic, we would still work with them. While true, this is an ethical question, and the procedure is not ethical. If the punishment procedure was ethical, then it's not an issue, but it's unethical. And so the behavior analyst can't knowingly engage and collaborate in unethical activities. So C, discuss with their boss next steps as the analyst cannot work on a case that is violating the ethical code. This is the answer. The analyst has to figure something out. They can't knowingly violate the code by collaborating with this teacher who is not bound by our code, but still engaging in unethical BACB activity. And then D, document all further issues so that they have everything in writing. This is always a good idea, right? You want to document everything all the time, but the analyst has to address this. They can no longer engage in these activities that they know are unethical because then they're in violation of the code themselves. Tate brings into his clinic a huge box of toys that he picked up over the weekend. To start the day, he tells his learners to line up in a straight line. Each learner takes a turn picking from several different items on a table. Once that item is chosen, the next learner steps up and picks an item from the array. What does this most resemble? Pretty straightforward question, right? And remember, not every question is going to be incredibly difficult, right? When you get an easy question, you trust your prep, you answer it, we move on. So, what is this question asking? Well, it's asking about what is going on here. What does this strategy or idea resemble? Tate has a huge box of toys. He tells the learners line up in a straight line, and then each take a turn picking from several different items. Once the item's chosen, the next learner steps up and picks the item from the array. So let's say there's 10 items, 10 kids. Kid one steps up, takes toy, right? There's now 9 items, 9 kids left. So what does that sound like to you? A paired choice preference assessment. Well, if he has 9 items on the table or 10 items on the table, right, that's not a paired choice, because paired choice, we are assessing 2 items at a time. And so with preference assessments, you always want to ask yourself first, well, how many stimuli are we assessing at the moment? And here, it's multiple, right? He's got a huge box of toys. There are several items. B, a dependent group contingency. A dependent group contingency, also known as the hero procedure, is when the whole group is dependent on somebody engaging in a response or reinforcement. We're not talking about group contingencies here. This looks more like a preference assessment. So now we have multiple stimulus with replacement, multiple stimulus without. And in multiple stimulus with, right, we're looking at typically 3 or more stimuli where when an item is selected, it's put back and the other items are replaced. That's not what occurred here. When an item was selected in this case, what happened? That item was gone, the next learner picked up and picked from the remaining items. So what this most resembles is D, multiple stimulus without replacement preference assessment. You, a behavior analyst, are observing 2 of your technicians discussing the new pairing strategy you just taught them. You hear one technician tell the other that by creating a generalized conditioned reinforcer, they'll now be able to use that reinforcer with a bunch of different behaviors, but that it won't be usable outside of the clinic. Do you find anything wrong with this statement? So you've got to evaluate, and this is sort of not only a generalized conditioned reinforcement question, but also a personnel question, because part of your job as personnel management is evaluating things like this. So we know the technicians are discussing pairing, right? And in particular, GCRs, generalized conditional reinforcers. So typically we're talking money, tokens, praise, right? Things that can be carried around, used readily, used in a variety of situations. Well, the technician says that reinforcer, once it's a generalized condition one, will be used with a bunch of different behaviors, but not usable outside of the clinic. What's the issue with that? Well, it's backwards, right? What makes a generalized condition reinforcer powerful in a GCR is that it's usable in a variety of situations. It's not necessarily about how many behaviors, right? Because by definition, if it's a reinforcer, then it's going to reinforce the behavior it follows. So the technician has it backwards. So do you find anything wrong? No, the technician described a GCR correctly. They did not. B, yes, the reinforcer won't be usable across different behaviors. Well, that's not the case. If it's a reinforcer, then by definition, it should reinforce behavior. C, yes, a GCR is defined by its effectiveness across different environments rather than behaviors. That's what we're looking for. GCRs are defined by effectiveness in different scenarios, different environments, by their generalization or their generalization ability, right? Not about the behaviors they reinforce, but in how many situations they can be used. And then D, it depends on what type of GCR you're creating. No, generalized condition reinforcers are all generalized condition reinforcers. They're used in a variety of situations to reinforce a bunch of different behaviors. Thank you for watching. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Subscribe for all of our content and updates. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.